got two of the hottest flagships to launch at the back end of 2013, direct competitors from two manufacturers dying to hold more market share. So who has the better handset, LG with the G2 or Sony with the ramped up Xperia Z1? Pick up either today by following the link in the description to head on over to mobicity.com. I'm going to keep this concise, full reviews of both devices just around the corner. Let's start with what they both share in common. Both are sporting LTE connectivity, and this is comparable in both the G2 and Z1. I didn't notice huge variations between transmission speeds and connection dropouts between the two. Both have the same Wi-Fi model, NFC, Bluetooth 4.0, USB OTG, GPS, and a 3000 mAh battery. The battery life on both has been excellent, full day phones for the average user. In use, I found I could often drag a little bit more life out of the Z1, and this has helped with excellent stamina mode options. But on HD video playback test, the Z1 crapped out at about 10 hours, where the G2 managed to pull 10.5. They both also sport the new Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 chipset with quad-core 2.26 GHz CPU, 2 GB of RAM, and the Adreno 330 GPU. On benchmarks, it's really quite hard to distinguish the two obviously. The Z1 came out ever so slightly ahead, but both performed admirably. This may be in part due to the heavy-handed LG skin running in the G2, but the Z1 in reality did show slightly less stagger, particularly with the home screen animations, and load times for both comparable, with the Z1 bursting into action just a little bit quicker in certain applications. Both devices can come with 16 gigs of internal storage, but the G2 also has the 32 gig variant, but lacks expandable storage via microSD, where the Z1 picks that up. The G2 does have an IR blaster for controlling the electronic devices in your house though. The software for both are skins of Android to varying degrees. LG's cut is just too mundane, too cartoony, but thankfully completely editable. It certainly has the greatest customization of the two, just falls short in visual appeal. Of included applications, Sony bundles a lot of their inclusions that are just in-house cracks and more popular attempts already in the Play Store, but they do stick with a lot more stock versions of apps, and this makes for a more stunning look. LG piles in a lot of useful stuff like Quick Translator and Notebook. It's just the rest of the apps they chose to make look custom, look ordinary. A point I will note with the UIs for both is how they handled multitasking. The G2 uses Q-Slide applications that are scalable and run atop the UI or each other. It's not usable for me in any circumstance. Sony attacks with small apps, which come bundled, or you can turn any widget into a small app, which runs atop the UI or one another again. Still isn't a fitting and usable solution compared to Samsung's multi-window. The load time of the multitasking panel on the Z1 is vastly quicker than the G2's, and this was something I found a big issue with the G2. The last important note for the software is that the G2 can be used in its entirety in landscape. The Z1 can't unless docked. Why they didn't offer it in general, I don't understand. So far, this comparison has been in Sony's favour. Now it switches. While the Z1's display this time bounds ahead of its predecessor, it still isn't as good as what the G2 offers. Both have excellent brightness, vivid colours and brilliant whites, but the 5-inch 1080p TFT triluminous display paled in viewing angles to the G2's 5.2-inch 1080p True HD IPS Plus LCD, which also offered richer colour tones and not to mention an extra 0.2 of an inch screen size real estate. And this brings us to build quality. Even with the large panel, the G2 is the smaller phone. It has impressively thin bezels that gives it the smaller footprint. This is important. I found the G2 with its contoured chassis to conform more easily to my palm, and single-handed use was unhindered even with the larger screen. I found I needed to reshuffle to reach sections of the Z1, and it never completely felt comfortable. I mean, it isn't massively smaller than the Note 3, which has the significantly larger display, but the materials and build quality of the Z1 is impressive and superior to the G2. The plastic of the G2 is slimy and creaks. Its metallic-esque band is nothing compared to the real metallic frame of the Z1 and its glossy glass panels. Not to mention the Z1 is water resistant, which is a refreshing feature for a flagship. The other big difference, the Z1 goes with its traditional unlock button on the side, and at times I even found it cumbersome. The G2 changes the game and puts it on the rear panel. It's ingenious and something I loved, not to mention its knock-on unlock feature. And lastly, the cameras. I found this the hardest point of all. On paper, Sony with the new G lens, its whopping 20.7 megapixel autofocus camera and massive sensor should be the victor. But in superior auto mode where most will head, it never shoots to the full 20 megapixels, rather defaulting to 8. I found auto mode gave me at times warm, overcooked images with too much grain. Full daylight shots were generally reasonable between the two, but in low light the Z1 attempted to expose shadow areas too much, and I found shots were unnatural with plenty of noise. Night shots were sluggish in the Z1 as well, coming through in a less natural tone or not coming through at all. The G2 with its 13 megapixel autofocus camera in general did a much better job. It showed richer blues at times, but the quality of the images in almost all circumstances was amazing. The UI and inclusions for both are comparable. Both are as easy to use as one another. I do give LG the upper hand. I found the UI here slightly more approachable and laid out simpler, which is kind of odd for them. So, my parting word then. Looking at where Sony came from with the Xperia Z with all of its shortcomings to the Xperia Z1, I must say, the Z1 is an outstanding flagship device. Its build and feature set is very unique and appealing. In use, however, I found the shape and contour of the G2 to be less cumbersome on a day-to-day, and its much smaller weight was appreciated. It's the brilliant and larger display that sells me the G2. It's slightly more innovative and featured, and the camera was what I wanted to use more regularly. If MobiCity.com were wanting to get me something for Christmas, wink wink, it would be the LG G2. It actually is also the cheaper option by $100 outright, but check out the link in the description to pick one up for yourselves. I'm Kurt, and this is KABOOtech. Stay tuned for the full reviews.